We all belong outside. We're drawn to nature, whether it's the recorded sounds of the ocean we doze off to, or the succulents that adorn our homes. Nature makes all of our lives, well, better. Despite all this, we often go about our busy lives removed from it. But the outdoors is closer than we realize. With AllTrails, you can discover trails nearby and explore confidently. With offline maps and on-trail navigation, download the free app today and make the most of your summer with AllTrails.
Hi, this is Paige from Giggly Squad, and I want to talk to you about Splash Refresher and my water intake. Okay, so you guys obviously know that I'm a hydrated girly, but sometimes when you drink that much water, it starts to just taste bland, and you're just like, I need something to spice it up. That's why I love Splash Refresher. It has 0 sugar, 0 calories, and it's a splash of sweetness. And they come in 5 different flavors. They're so good. Wild berry, acai grape, pineapple mango, lemon, and mandarin orange. My favorite is the wild berry because I just love a berry. So if you're like me and you're drinking water all day, then try Splash Refresher. It's going to absolutely change your water game, and it's good for you.
Even on a budget, quality is non-negotiable. That's why Quince is the place to score high-end essentials at 50 to 80% less than similar brands. Get your hands on buttery soft cashmere sweaters from just $60, Italian leather jackets, and so much more. And the best part about Quince, they exclusively partner with factories committed to safe, ethical, and responsible manufacturing. Elevate your style without the elevated price tag with Quince. Go to quince.com/upgrade for free shipping and 365-day returns.
I feel like we're talking ourselves into like a council of despair, and we have to be cheerful because it was a bloody good result. Welcome to the Power Test. I'm Ayesha Hazarika.
And I'm Sam Freedman. Well, welcome to a very special edition of the Power Test on the morning after Labour passed the first part of the Power Test in winning it, becoming the government, which is something we've been talking about for a very long time. Presumably we're now allowed to accept it now that it's actually happened, Ayesha.
I don't want to rush to any conclusions. Look, I know we won a landslide, but I'm just very conscious about the share of the vote.
What about the next one? What about 20?
Yeah, I'm very concerned about 4 elections time. Like I just don't think we can bank any win right now.
So they have now won, and it was quite an extraordinary night. And we want to sort of run through sort of the big moments and sort of think a bit about what next, I guess, for this new government. But I'm not quite sure how you're still functioning because we're recording this on Friday night. You've been going for about 48 hours non-stop. You've been sort of on every media channel. How was the experience of sort of doing a sort of very media-heavy election?
It was actually really good fun, and I have been quite lucky for the last few elections that I have been doing bits of punditry, and I think it ended up being a sort of like Armageddon of punditry. This one, which was fitting because it was a big one to do. So my night was absolutely insane. I started off doing a sort of corporate event. Then I went to Times Radio, which had like a full brass band outside the studio, which was very surreal. Then I went to ITV. Then I went to the BBC, which was actually really good, but very surreal. Like it was very weird being at the BBC because I was doing BBC Radio 4 with Nick Robinson and Rachel Burden, which was really good. And then I ended up being in the studio with Laura Koonsberg and Clive Myrie when Rishi Sunak made his kind of weird concession speech like in the middle of the night, and it kind of caught everybody unawares. Everyone was like, what? Laura Koonsberg was like, oh my God, it's over. It's literally over. He's literally just like basically given up. It's like, oh my God, this is so weird. And we were all like slightly shocked. And then I just started crying. It was just really pathetic, but not crying in like a nice, pretty way, but like crying with a massive snot bubble.
I was watching the BBC at that point. It was actually one of my favourite moments of the night was just watching you get so emotional at the exact moment when they passed the number, because he made the speech and then they passed the number on the screen, just to see all of that kind of frustration of the last 14 years pour out of you on live television. It was a really great moment. I watched so many sort of Labour Labour shadow ministers be sort of resolutely on message and say all the right things, and then you were just having a good cry.
Yeah. Listen, I'm a menopausal woman. I'm a menopausal, long-suffering Labour supporter. There wasn't an HRT patch large enough to cope with the emotion, Sam.
It was a great moment. That and Neil Kinnock having a great chuckle when George Galloway lost were the two sort of highlights for me of the night.
So yeah, that was my really exciting election night.
Right, yeah, great. Well, I'm like the total opposite. I turned down every party. I turned down every media invitation. I was literally on my computer for the entire night, buried in a spreadsheet. I can't talk to people on election night. I'm too focused on recording everything that's happening.
So you're basically recreating like the John Curtis Nerve Centre, but you're just doing it by yourself.
Yes, literally, I've got like screens everywhere, spreadsheets I'm trying to input stuff into.
Like the nerd cave.
And I always find they go so fast, like because I'm just so busy focused on trying to process every result, I sort of look up at my screen and suddenly it's 7:00 in the morning. Everything's happened. But I think as well as your moment on the BBC, I think probably the highlight was Truss. I did really enjoy that moment. Truss, you got in the sort of full glory of the sort of slow hand clap as she refused to go on stage, and her looking like, just that sort of face of sort of frustration as she...
Like a sort of confused dog, basically, just like completely sort of...
It's just that sort of catharsis of like, finally, you're actually getting what you deserve for screwing up the country. It was gorgeous.
That to me felt like the sort of Portillo moment. And I was in Good Morning Britain. I was sat next to Kwasi Kwarteng, and he's so bad at maths, he thought she'd won, which probably probably shows how the mini budget went. You can give us a clue into what happened there. But he was like, no, I think she's won. And it was like, Susanna Reeves like, no, she's not won.
And it was sort of the way it sort of finished off the night as well. It was very well timed.
Yeah, in the cold light of day. There was a great sense of karma about it. There's a great sense of karma. So what did you think when the exit poll dropped?
I thought it was about where I was expecting. I'd predicted about 100 seats for the Tories and about 440 seats for Labour. It was a little bit different to what I was expecting, but pretty close. I didn't get the kind of surprise I got in 2015. You got an even bigger surprise in 2015, or 2017, both of which my sort of draw dropped. It didn't drop this time. I started looking at the data that come out, and I realised pretty much immediately the Reform weren't going to get 13 seats, and that was a mistake. But otherwise, I sort of thought this is pretty sensible. What I hadn't quite appreciated was that it would be possible for that kind of majority to happen on that smaller lead. Because the actual lead is only 10%. I thought you'd probably need a lead of 13, 14, maybe 15% to get that kind of result. The efficiency of the Labour vote was really quite extraordinary. The efficiency of that and the extent of tactical voting. The way in which in basically every safe seat, the Labour vote went down, and everywhere where Labour needed it to go up, it went up. It was sort of really quite an extraordinary sort of operation. So that was what I started to realise in terms of looking at the data during the course of the evening. The thing that frustrated me, I guess, about the coverage, and I don't know how you felt sort of being part of it, was the sort of fixation on reform. Yeah. It's certainly a big part of the story. From nowhere, they got a lot of votes, but they won 5 seats. Greens won 4, Lib Dems won 72. And yet it felt like, certainly in the early hours of the morning, it was all about reform.
I could not agree more. And I actually did get quite annoyed with a couple of broadcasters. I think that exit poll just skewed the narrative. If they had got 13, that is a big deal. I mean, even getting 5 is very notable. But certainly all the media outlets I was doing was just like obsessed with reform, like completely obsessed. And I think one of the things that sort of pissed me off a bit, and I did challenge a couple of broadcasters that I was on with, it's almost like to be a pundit, and, of course I am a pundit, but sometimes there's always a sort of too clever by halves, which is you can't just look at a Route 1 story and be like, oh, there's a massive story saying
majority.
Yeah, like Labour never wins, and it's just won like a stonking majority that you can see from space. So they're like, oh, let's do like a little like kind of, sneaky way into another story. And I actually did sort of say to quite a few people, look, guys, there is a really big, obvious story staring you in the face. I think the other thing that just slightly annoyed me, and I suppose this is my kind of slight tribalism coming out, is just the whole narrative straight away, which was, okay, fair enough, it's a massive stonking majority, but what a low turnout. Like suddenly the rules of the game had changed, and we actually had like somehow the broadcasters and the commentators and the Corbynites had changed the rules of the game, and it wasn't about the number of seats you won, it was all about the vote share.
Yes, which I don't remember being so important to them when Cameron won in 2015 on a vote share of 36%. I don't recall that being the main talking point of the night. And in a way, the kind of vote share, it is interesting, but it's also misleading because people vote in a first past the post system. A lot of people who would have otherwise voted Labour voted Liberal Democrat because they were in seats in the South. That's what they needed to do to boot out the Tories. People in North Herefordshire and Waveney Valley were voting Green because they wanted to kick out the Tories. We have a system in which people don't vote for the party that they necessarily want to win always.
And also this idea that it doesn't count as a vote for Labour or Keir Starmer because people just wanted to kick out the Tories. Well, who did you think was going to come in? What do you think is going through these people's minds when they think kick out the Tories? Who do they think is going to turn up?
When Boris Johnson won last time, people weren't saying, well, he doesn't have a mandate because it's just people voting because they don't like Jeremy Corbyn, even though that was true for a lot of people. I mean, you don't want to get too sort of, the BBC about everything, but they do seem to treat the left and the right differently on this stuff.
Yeah. To your point on tactical voting, I think that is really, really interesting. Quite a lot of people, are saying, oh my God, this low share of the vote means that we absolutely have to change the first past the post system. But I actually think that the phenomenon of tactical voting at this election is people working round the first past the post system and actually saying, look, if we want to vote tactically, we can, and it can have results. Like Jonathan Ashworth's seat, right? Nobody saw that coming. That was like a real shock. What I think is interesting is maybe as we move into an era where we do more tactical voting, maybe that means that the share of the vote for the big two parties will naturally just be lower.
We've been in that phase for quite a while now, really since 2005. And it was the last two elections, 2019, 2017, were very unusual because of Brexit, which then sort of polarised everything around one issue and led to big shares for the two parties. That's now finished. So we're back to the kind of where we were in 2015 again. It's now going to be the norm for no party to get 40%, as it has been for the sort of elections before 2015. I do support PR. I support PR because I just think it's a fairer system. I think probably we are going to end up being dragged towards PR just because the electorate are behaving in a much more PR-ish way anymore. As you say, they're starting to almost fix first past the post as if it was a PR system by being more sophisticated. Greens winning North Herefordshire, or as you say, Leicester South being won by an independent. You didn't used to get that kind of result. So I think we'll kind of almost end up there eventually, almost by default. But obviously it's not going to be a big priority immediately for a new Labour government.
Just to pick up on something you said, and that is just the kind of ruthless efficiency of Labour's operation and, credit where credit's due. I think Morgan McSweeney and Pat McFadden have run like a brilliant operation. I'm just keen to know your kind of thoughts on how they've sort of focused the efficiency of resources and where to target.
They have attempted to become a party that all different types of voters can vote for. So they're not trying to particularly focus on one type of voter in one type of seat, but just to get enough voters in every seat that you can win everywhere. In 2017, you did have a very enthusiastic group of people supporting Labour. More people voted Labour in 2017 than this time. But it was very concentrated amongst a certain type of demographic in a certain type of place. And so you got a very, very inefficient vote. It absolutely piled up votes in London, but you didn't win places that Labour won last night. They didn't win places like Rother Valley, let alone places like Bury St Edmunds and Northumberland, which they've never won in their history before. So it was all about making sure you had enough voters in every type of seat to be able to take advantage of the fact the Tory vote was going to drop considerably. The downside of that approach. There's two downsides. I mean, it was worked brilliantly this time, no doubt about it. It was a brilliant campaign. One is you've got loads and loads of really small majorities everywhere.
Yeah.
You've got a lot of MPs who are going to be thinking, I'm going to lose next time if we're not really careful. And it also means you had to run a campaign that didn't upset anybody, which meant, as we've discussed during the course of the campaign, it had to be pretty safe. That can't continue in government. And I kind of think the dynamic over the next year, sort of moving on a bit to kind of what's going to happen next, the dynamic is going to be this sort of tension between all of these MPs who are thinking, I've got a small majority, I don't want to upset people, we can't do anything that's too unpopular, and Morgan McSweeney sitting in number 10 thinking, I want to win the next election. And others going, yeah, but we're not going to be able to win the election unless we do some unpopular things and achieve something that's going to change the country. That feels like it's going to be such a driving tension of the next government. I mean, do you feel that that's right? And do you think one side of that is going to win out?
I think it is going to be a concern going forward. I mean, my thinking is To have got where we are tonight with this huge majority and this complete clear win and a big mandate, I just think that's brilliant. And I think full credit to Keir Starmer and his team, given where the party was in 2019, absolutely smashed to pieces. I think the whole team have done an absolutely brilliant job. I think our question has kind of evolved over time. Our first thing was like, do we think they can actually pass the first power test, which is to get into power?
Yeah.
Well, they've absolutely smashed that in the last 24 hours. The next question we've tested and explored is, can they change the country for the better in difficult, limited circumstances? And I think that is going to now be such a focus for them. I did like a phone-in TV show this morning. I mean, there are quite a few people ringing in who were not happy about a Labour victory, but I think a lot of the listeners are quite reformy anyway. But there were quite a few Labour people who rang in saying they were over the moon, but, and this was the big but, they had a lot of hope and a lot of expectation, and they wanted to see some tangible benefits to their lives. And when we pressed them and said, what kind of time frame are you thinking? Because everything's really broken, it's going to take some time. I thought people would say, oh, maybe like 4 or 5 years. A lot of people were like, oh, 1 year. To your point about a big majority, but many of these seats being small, wafer thin majorities. I am just worried about what can Labour deliver quite quickly that is not going to cost a huge amount of money.
I think you might get an initial boost, an initial honeymoon, because I think it's going to feel very different. There's so much low-hanging fruit that the last government have sort of ignored for ideological or party-based reasons, that I think there's like a bunch of stuff you can do quite quickly. And we had Matthew Taylor on the programme talking about the NHS a couple of episodes ago, where he sort of said there was, he gave us a list of a bunch of things you could do just on the NHS. I think the problem's almost in the middle, because there's quick wins and then there's stuff that takes a long time. It's the sort of 2-3 year hump in the middle that you've got to get over, where you've done your quick wins and the stuff that's going to take a long time hasn't hit yet, where people are going to start thinking there hasn't been enough change. I've been through this process. When you go into government for the first time after being in opposition, it's really exciting. You get to press to sort of want to get access and are favourable to you for a while. And you think, this is easy. What's all the fuss about? And then everything starts going wrong and you think, oh, I see. It's actually really bloody difficult. So it's having the resilience, I guess, to cope with the difficult times. And Starmer said that. It's just whether the party will really hold together during those periods when the poll ratings do drop.
I think another standout moment for me as well was Scotland. I had spent a bit of time in Scotland and I could tell that, people were moving towards Labour and that people were very cross with the Tories and quite cross with the SNP. But I think the SNP collapse is huge. For Labour to have picked up 37 seats, I mean, I thought they would be doing well if they got over 20, but that's such a big result for Labour.
Yeah, and what's quite interesting, I think, is in a lot of seats, the Tories came second to Labour. So you've got a situation in which it's not quite reverting back to the way it was before 2015, but you're heading back towards Scottish politics looking like the pre-independence change with the SNP becoming so dominant. And I think it will be quite hard for the SNP to replicate a 2015 or 2019 style kind of Scottish wipeout type victory in the future. They're also in a lot of financial difficulty, and losing that much short money is going to really hit them very hard. They don't have the resources to cope with losing, I think it'll be about £1 million a year. And it will be quite interesting to see how they recover, because it feels very fractious within the SNP at the moment. It feels like a very unhappy party. And Stephen Flynn is going to have a very big job working with John Swinney to sort of put the party back together. And whether they can do it is a sort of quite big open question. But it's also a kind of like, it's an opportunity for Scottish Labour to sort of re-establish itself. And we've talked a bit about this before. I'd be interested to see how you think, given how big that cohort now is and who's in it, how they're going to act, and whether they're going to you're going to get a more explicitly Scottish voice in Westminster, or whether they'll just sort of think of themselves as being Labour MPs like anybody else.
I think when you look at the cohort, and I've got a lot of friends who have stood as candidates and were successful. Honestly, I'm not just saying this because I know lots of them. They're a really bright, ambitious, talented group of people. I mean, obviously, you've got big names like Douglas Alexander, but people like Blair McDougall, who've been around for a long
Kirsty
time.
McNeil, who's great.
Kirsty McNeil, Mel Ward, some really, really great names. They've all lived through that period of Labour getting completely wiped out by the SNP. And I think they're quite cognizant of a terrible slur that an outgoing Scottish Labour leader, Joanne Lamont, made of the Labour Party, saying that the Labour Party in Westminster treated Scottish Labour like the branch office. And that was an attack that was very wounding to the Labour Party in Scotland. The SNP seized upon it. And there was a certain truth in what she said, which is why it stung so much. But that expression, branch office, it like sends a shiver down the spine of anybody who's been connected with Scottish politics in the Labour Party. And I think these new MPs will want to really send a signal to their constituents and to the Scottish media that they're very proud to be part of a UK Labour Party, but they are also part of a Scottish caucus and that they are proud to be Scottish Labour under Anas Sarwar. The question, though, is going to be, one of the things that I think Labour didn't do particularly well in the olden days before it got wiped out was people kind of got their safe seats in Scotland and all they wanted was a nice fat ministerial job in London and didn't really tend to their constituencies. And there was a feeling that the constituency was used as a launch pad to get some swishy job. And this is actually true, by the way, across the board, particularly because so many people got parachuted in at the last minute. I was having a conversation with some senior Labour people and they were saying a lot of the new intake are going to have to really put a shift in their constituency and really embed themselves in their constituency and not just chase after a ministerial job straight away.
Yeah, but you have also got people, like Blair McDougall, like Douglas Alexander, Pamela Nash, who went through that 2015 experience, so know why that happened and presumably not going to want to let it happen again. It's kind of similar in a way to the Red Wall seats, nearly all of which were won back. It's not going to be the same. It can't be the same as last time where a lot of those seats were taken for granted for decades because they'd always been Labour forever. There's now an understood threat, I guess, that means people are going to behave differently, especially as in a lot of them, you've got Reform in a pretty strong second place. Labour's going to have to sort of behave differently with the big majority to the way it did 97 to 2010 when a lot of seats were just taken for granted.
And on that Reform point, we know that Reform has done a lot of damage to the Conservatives and, they're going to have a massive existential crisis about do they chase the Reform dragon or do they admit that they actually did lose votes to the Liberal Democrats and others. But what do you think the threat from Reform to Labour could be like down the track?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the map now, you've got 90 seats where the Reform are second to Labour. That's a lot of seats. So it depends a bit on what happens with Reform. Farage has not had a particularly good track record at building up parties after an initial surge of popularity. But if he brings in the right support and so on to build a bit of an infrastructure around Reform, they'll have a bit of short money now from Parliament. They have a few MPs. If they can build a party, a proper party, it could be a serious threat in a lot of those seats. A lot of those majorities are only 5,000-6,000. Some of them are less than that. So you're going to have 90 of those Labour MPs all thinking, how do I fight Reform? And then you've got 40 MPs who have the Greens second to them. And they're going to be thinking, how do I deal with this kind of left-wing insurgency against me? You're going to have these two different groups within the Labour Party, two different groups of MPs who have very different types of main opponent in their seat, very different types of demographic in their constituency, who might take very different views on immigration or crime or Europe. And that's going to be another big party management issue. How do you deal with kind of Reform versus Greens? It's kind of like the Brexit issue on steroids almost, because it covers more than just one issue.
And it will be interesting to see how the policy collides with the party management stuff.
Right. And immigration is just such an obvious example. We did an episode on it recently. It is inevitable you are going to have a situation in which Yvette Cooper and her team are going to want to do, they're obviously going to scrap Rwanda. They're not going to do the kind of crazy crap that the Conservatives did, but they will definitely want to show they're being tough on immigration in some way. And they will do things that Liberals don't like. And that's exactly the kind of area where you could get a split, or net zero is another area where you could so easily get a split. It's going to be difficult to manage those tensions. And this is exactly the difficulty of building the kind of massive voter coalition that Labour have with a huge majority. But yeah, we're falling into the trap a bit, aren't we?
We are. I was just thinking that. I feel like we're talking ourselves into like a council of despair, and we have to be cheerful because it was a bloody good result. I mean, it was a really, really, really good result.
Yeah, not just for Labour. I mean, the Lib Dems had an extraordinary result as well. They're the biggest third party in over 100 years.
And I suppose the final group we haven't really touched on was the sort of independence and the sort of Gaza element of things? Because look, we have discussed before that foreign policy will probably be quite a tricky issue for Labour, although I do think David Lammy's a great appointment. But, how do you think Labour's going to be thinking about that going forward as well? Because, West Streeting only clung on by about 500 votes.
Yeah.
Jess Phillips
by 700, yeah.
Shabana Mahmood as well. I mean, these were pretty close. Although George Galloway, it was very, very good that George Galloway didn't win, and Paul Ward did a really great job in Rochdale, and I'm really pleased for Paul Ward. He's a great guy, and he'll be a really good MP, and he really cares about that area. I'm pondering about how Labour will think about the rise of these independents.
Yeah, and I just wanted to ask you about this, I guess, because you've been warning about it for quite a long time. I mean, you flagged it straight away after the invasion and the response from Israel, and the sort of mistake that Starmer made, the big error he made in that LBC interview. You flagged it straight away as being a potentially very big issue, and it has become a very big issue. I suppose the question, and I'm not sure what the answer is this just about Gaza? In which case, you'd really, really hope that by the time of the next election, it wouldn't be such a live issue, although who knows with the state of the Middle East. Or is it something much deeper, actually, about communities that feel that Westminster politics just doesn't speak to them at all and doesn't engage at all with the issues that their community has, or is actively alien and hostile towards their interests? Because it's not just the Muslim community. There was a couple of seats in Leicester East and in Harrow East, which is the only seat, I think, where the Tories significantly increased their majority in the country, which has a very big Gujarati Hindu population as well. So it's almost feels like you've got these kind of big ethnic group communities which are saying Labour isn't for us anymore, and it goes beyond Gaza. What do you think about that?
I think it's very nuanced, and I'm glad you made the point that it's not just Muslim communities. And I think sometimes there is a sort of lazy shorthand, which is all Muslims think the same, and it's all sort of one homogenous group, but which it isn't. But definitely the Gaza issue has become a lightning conductor issue. But I think the Gaza stuff is a good way in to poking around other deeper issues of disillusionment and alienation, poverty, feeling like they're a group which is either taken for granted or ignored or marginalized. I think it is actually quite a kind of layered mixed picture. And when I spoke to Paul Waugh about how they kind of defeated Galloway in Rochdale, because I thought Galloway would be a lot more potent as a force on Gaza. But what was interesting speaking to Paul Waugh was that he was saying, look, it is actually about putting in the time to speak to different communities, to try and actually speak to them, respect them, understand what their concerns are. And often Gaza is definitely an issue, but there are other things as well. And it probably goes back to the fact that if you're representing a very mixed community, you can't wing it. You've got to spend the time in your community, knowing your constituents, doing them the courtesy of not taking them for granted and thinking about them. I mean, that is just another part of party management and being a good constituency MP. It's not going to solve everything, but I think that would help. I think sometimes there's been an old way of doing politics where the constituency MP will sort of do business with a couple of gatekeepers into the community in quite an old-fashioned way. And they sort of think, well, if they sort of do some deals with these kind of community elders, then they've sort of sewn up the ethnic vote. And I think that idea is really old-fashioned now and outdated, because there's big differences, I think, between older communities who might be prepared to still do that kind of politicking, but a lot of younger ethnic minorities and younger progressives have just got a very, very different view. They're doing their politics via WhatsApp and TikTok, and they're pushing back against their elders in terms of feeling alienated from all of that. So I think it is quite complicated.
And it's going to require a different way of thinking about how to do politics in those areas. It even goes to the polling. I mean, there was a small polling miss. I mean, polls were broadly accurate, but they did overstate the Labour share. And I think one of the reasons they overstated the Labour share is because they don't pick up minority votes very well. And I think they missed about 2% of people they were essentially classifying as Labour voters as who actually voted for independence. So even right across the political industry, not just for the Labour Party, for pollsters, for newspapers, there's a sort of question as to how do you engage seats where this is happening in a different kind of way, and how do these independents who are now in Parliament going to behave? What are they going to do? Will their communities feel like it's worked, I guess? Because that's another, we haven't really been in this position. Galloway's been in before, but we know he's an arse. But if, people who do genuinely care about their community are in Parliament as independents, what's that going to look like? Will they gang together? Will they act as a caucus? I don't think we know yet.
Will Jeremy Corbyn bring them together?
Yeah. I mean, that would require him to be able to organise a party, but
maybe a festival.
Yeah, maybe you could have a festival. As you say, what happened to West Streeting, what happened to Jess Phillips, it's a very, very big, clear warning sign, which I'm sure Labour are not going to ignore. It's just a question of what they do about it, because it's part of this sort of sense of being under attack across the whole country in different types of seats at the next election if they don't think about it in a more effective way.
Well, be careful for what you wish. Yeah. I mean, look, we've gone through, some of the flashpoints ahead, but I mean, how do you feel? Because, here we are, we've been waiting for this moment for such a long time, particularly the journey we've taken together. I mean, do you feel hopeful? Do you feel optimistic? Do you feel good? Do you feel excited?
I feel like I've been waiting for something to happen for 2 years now. It's sort of been so frustrating for the last 2 years, watching this dying government do absolutely nothing and messing everything up. And we've just been saying, when Labour comes in, and now it's here and it's happening. So it feels like suddenly there's this burst of activity that's going to happen and you can get involved with and be part of. So because of the context, because of the situation, there is a sense of foreboding, nervousness, but there's also a sense that finally the door's been unlocked and you can go in and we can actually get on with things. So yeah, I do feel hopeful and I do feel excited. And I think next week we're going to have, in our last episode of the series, we're going to have a more detailed sort of investigation of what the big challenges over the next year are going to be and what the big opportunities over the next year are going to be. But it feels like that's now a meaningful conversation where it's really going to happen rather than just waiting. I don't think I'll ever be quite as emotional as you because I haven't been through all the things along the way.
You haven't been through all the pain and all the depression. I mean, obviously I feel sort of slightly hysterical and delirious at the moment, but I genuinely feel that yes, it's going to be tough, but I do feel cautiously optimistic and I do feel really hopeful. And I do think when I saw Keir Starmer do that speech in front of Downing Street, which was such a moment, I thought his speech was really, really good. And I think this idea of, I love that phrase about how politics, you kind of tread lightly in your life. And it just does feel that politics has been such a kind of out of control, psychological car crash drama for so long. It's just been very triggering and very exhausting for people. And I think, look, it is going to be hard, but I think what we can be hopeful about is, I think Keir Starmer has proved that when he puts his mind to something, he can really do good on it. And, if he's done this to the party, then let's hope he can transfer some of that magic onto the country. I think the team that he's picked is really good. I think there's some really good, talented people in there. A lot of the advisors around him are really good. Sue Gray, for example, I think she is going to really come into her own now. She's been gearing up for this moment. She and Keir Starmer are going to be a formidable team. Look, let's see what happens, time will tell. But I think for a lot of people, there's just a relief. It feels like being released from like a hostage situation. Yes. Like, you know what I mean?
It feels like relief more than excitement at the moment for me. But I think as it starts to become real and as you start to get actual government happening rather than just sort of government by Daily Mail, I think it will start to feel pretty exciting. At least I hope so. Well, on that note, let's try and end on a more positive note. But we will be back next week with one final episode of the series where we will dig into some of these opportunities in more detail.
And right now, I am going to sleep.
You're going to go to sleep, and I'm going to go to sleep too. Night, everybody.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that. And if you are not a member of the Power Test crew, you can head to the powertest.co.uk or the powertest.substack.com. You'll get episodes ad-free and early before anyone else. And there's also an exclusive chance to be part of the podcast and lots more. Also, do get involved with us if you've got any questions or comments or ideas you'd like us to explore. We'd love to hear from you. You can email us on pod@thepowertest.co.uk. You can also get involved on social media as well.
And we've also got our brand new YouTube channel, which is Power Test Pod, and you can find clips on there. The Power Test only exists because of the amazing support from you, our members, and our supporters. And we're also delighted to have the backing of some brilliant organisations like the Future Governance Forum, which is providing intellectual and practical infrastructure vital to the revival of progressive government in the UK, and the Centre for Progressive Policy, a think tank championing inclusive economic growth. We're also really glad to have support from the Institute for Global Change, who provide us with exceptional research and briefings, and also partner with the fantastic Labour List, bringing to life many of the issues, themes and discussions we're covering on the pod.
Even on a budget, quality is non-negotiable. That's why Quince is the place to score high-end essentials at 50 to 80% less than similar brands. Get your hands on buttery soft cashmere sweaters from just $60, Italian leather jackets, and so much more. And the best part about Quince, they exclusively partner with factories committed to safe, ethical, and responsible manufacturing. Elevate your style without the elevated price tag with Quince. Go to quince.com/upgrade for free shipping and 365-day returns.
Hi, this is Paige from Giggly Squad, and I want to talk to you about Splash Refresher and my water intake. Okay, so you guys obviously know that I'm a hydrated girly, but sometimes when you drink that much water, it starts to just taste bland, and you're just like, I need something to spice it up. That's why I love Splash Refresher. It has 0 sugar, 0 calories, and it's a splash of sweetness. And they come in 5 different flavors. They're so good. Wild berry, acai grape, pineapple mango, lemon, and mandarin orange. My favorite is the wild berry because I just love a berry. So if you're like me and you're drinking water all day, then try Splash Refresher. It's going to absolutely change your water game, and it's good for you.
Acast powers the world's best podcasts. Here's a show that we recommend.
From BBC Radio 4, Britain's biggest paranormal podcast is going on a road trip.
I thought in that moment, oh my God, we've summoned something from this board.
This is Uncanny USA.
He says, somebody's in the house, and I screamed.
Listen to Uncanny USA wherever you get your BBC podcasts, if you dare.
Acast helps creators launch, grow, and monetize their podcasts everywhere. Acast.com.